Before cartels ruled the news and before syndicates controlled modern cities, there was Cosa Nostra, the original mafia. But unlike Hollywood's portrayal, the Sicilian mafia didn't begin in a smoky backroom or with a gunshot in a dark alley. It began, strangely enough, with citrus trees. Shocking, right? Let's rewind to mid-1800s Sicily. After centuries of foreign rule, from the Spanish to the Bourbons, the island was in chaos. The Italian state was newly unified, law enforcement was weak, and local landlords needed protection for their lands and exports. That's where the mafia stepped in. Not yet called Cosa Nostra, these early enforcers offered protection from bandits. But quickly it evolved. The protectors became predators. And what started as local thuggery became a structured, multi-tiered criminal enterprise rooted in tradition, violence, and Omeirada, the code of silence. By the early 1900s, Sicily wasn't just home to the mafia, it was ruled by it. Not officially. Not on paper. But in practice, if you wanted to do business, survive disputes, or win an election, you paid tribute to Cosa Nostra. They weren't just a gang. They were a shadow government. The early mafia had three things modern criminal empires still try to copy. 1. Structure. A hierarchy that kept leaders insulated from street crimes. 2. Secrecy. A culture so disciplined that members would rather die than speak. 3. Legitimacy. Connections with politicians, priests, and business owners. This was no longer about turf wars. This was about parallel power. And that's the foundation that allowed Cosa Nostra to expand beyond Sicily and reshape the world. Most criminal groups rely on fear. The Sicilian mafia took it a step further. They built a culture. Inside Cosa Nostra, there were no uniforms, no public ranks, and no written laws. Everything operated by code, whispered, remembered, and enforced with deadly precision. At the top stood the Capo dei Capi, the boss of bosses. Below him, capos or captains ran local territories. Soldiers carried out hits, collections, and surveillance. Associates, not officially inducted, did dirty work and hoped to earn their button. But the power wasn't just vertical. It was networked. Each family controlled a slice of Sicily with mutual respect agreements and occasional wars, keeping balance. The structure was flexible but absolute. Orders flowed down. Loyalty flowed up. And at the center of it all was Omeirada, the sacred code of silence. Omeirada wasn't just a rule. It was a religion. You did not speak to outsiders. Ever. If questioned by police, you forgot. If arrested, you took the fall. If betrayed, you died. And if you cooperated, you doomed your family. This silence made law enforcement's job nearly impossible. No witnesses. No confessions. No fear of prison. Only fear of betrayal. And when you joined Cosa Nostra, it wasn't a form you signed. It was a ritual soaked in symbolism and threat. Induction into the mafia wasn't like joining a club. It was a covenant. Here's how it worked. You were brought into a candlelit room. Your finger was pricked. Blood dripped onto a saint's image. The image was set on fire. As it burned in your hands, you swore the oath. If I betray, may I burn like this saint. From that moment on, you weren't just a soldier. You were a man of honor. And if you turned your back on the family turned its back on you with a bullet. The mafia didn't need police. It had vendetta. If someone disrespected you, it was settled in blood. If a politician refused a favor, a message was sent, maybe through a car bomb or a funeral wreath sent to their doorstep. If someone talked, their body might be found months later, in concrete, in the countryside, or not at all. This culture of punishment wasn't reckless. It was strategic. A single hit could keep a village silent for years. And that's how Cosa Nostra didn't just survive, they governed. Informally, invisibly, and absolutely. But fear alone doesn't build empires. The mafia understood something deeper. You don't just need money, you need legitimacy. So they bought judges, sponsored candidates, paid off police commanders, invested in construction companies and trucking unions. By the mid-20th century, Cosa Nostra wasn't just a gang. It was an institution, embedded in courts, churches, and commerce. If you were doing business in Palermo or Corleone or Trapani, chances are, you were doing business with the Mafia whether you knew it or not. Cosa Nostra may have been born in Sicily, but it was in America that it became a global brand. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw waves of Sicilian immigrants arrive in the United States. Most were poor, fleeing famine and repression. But among them were men who brought something else: the code, the culture, and the criminal blueprint. And at the heart of that transformation was Charles "Lucky" Luchiano. Luchiano wasn't just a mobster, he was a visionary. Raised on the tough streets of New York after immigrating from Sicily, he understood both the old ways and the opportunities of the new world. Where others saw turf wars, he saw potential. In the early 1930s, Luchiano revolutionized the American Mafia. He eliminated the unstable bosses of the old Sicilian Guard, streamlined operations, and introduced a new model, corporate-style structure with Sicilian discipline. His greatest innovation? The Commission, a national board of mafia bosses designed to settle disputes, divide territories, and maintain balance. It was modeled after the Sicilian Mafia's internal order, but scaled up for an American empire. Under Luciano's vision, the Mafia became more than a gang. It became a business syndicate, a parallel economy, a silent empire. From New York's 5 families to Chicago's outfit, Luciano's system of order, loyalty, and profit spread like wildfire. The Sicilian structure was the seed. Luchiano made it bloom. The Mafia didn't just cross the Atlantic. It replanted itself in American soil, and it thrived. By the 1920s, New York City had become the epicenter of the American Mafia. But unlike the chaotic gangs of the Prohibition era, the Sicilian mafiosi brought order. They organized territories. They resolved disputes through commissions. They expanded rackets, gambling, bootlegging, labor unions, construction, without drawing attention. The U.S. offshoot wasn't just Sicilian anymore. It included Italians from Naples and Calabria. But the Sicilian rules still applied: hierarchy, omerta, blood loyalty. And at the top of it all, the Commission, a governing body of the 5 families of New York, modeled after Cosa Nostra's structure in Sicily. It was like a corporate boardroom for organized crime. By the mid-20th century, the Mafia had penetrated nearly every major American industry that operated in cash or contracts. Construction, control of concrete unions gave them influence over city skylines. Garbage hauling, controlled waste management through intimidation and exclusive contracts. Las Vegas, through fronts and partners, they funneled profits out of casinos, skimming millions before taxes were even counted. Hollywood and music. Some record labels and talent managers had Mafia ties, ensuring both profits and silence. Politics. Campaign donations, voter fraud, and backdoor favors were all part of the playbook. By the 1960s, the Mafia was so embedded in American life that many cities ran on Mafia money without even realizing it. But this wasn't just the US-Sicily connection anymore. The enterprise grew. In Canada, the Ndrangheta and Sicilian factions built parallel empires. In Venezuela and Brazil, Mafia families invested in drug routes and laundering operations. In Switzerland, Cosa Nostra leveraged secret banking laws to move money without a trace. In Libya and Turkey, they helped smuggle heroin into Europe, the so-called pizza connection. And yes, even within the Vatican, there were quiet whispers of laundering through charitable fronts and banking arms, although never officially proven. Cosa Nostra's reach was now global. Not because they controlled everything, but because they knew how to make the world work for them. Why it worked? Let's break this down. How did a criminal organization that began among Sicilian peasants become one of the most powerful transnational syndicates in the world? 3 key reasons. 1. Structure. The decentralized cell system meant no single takedown could collapse the whole network. 2. Culture. Loyalty wasn't optional, it was cultural, generational, and enforced by violence. 3. Adaptability. They didn't just run rackets. They ran enterprises, adjusting to laws, markets, and even public perception. While other gangs fought turf wars, Cosa Nostra built infrastructure. And when they had to kill, they did it with purpose, not chaos. For decades, Cosa Nostra operated like a shadow state, too feared to be challenged, too connected to be touched. But by the 1980s, even the Mafia made a critical mistake. They got too visible. Bombings, high-profile assassinations, judges, mayors, journalists. Their power was no longer invisible. It was exploding in the streets. And that's when something changed. The Italian state, long seen as either powerless or complicit, finally decided to fight back. And it started with one word most mafiosi never expected to hear. Pentito. Meaning repentant. And that brings us to the first betrayal by Tommaso Buscetta. Tommaso Buscetta wasn't just any mafioso. He was a made man, deeply embedded in the Sicilian underworld. But after personal betrayals and the brutal murder of family members, Buscetta did the unthinkable. He flipped. Under protection of Italian judge Giovanni Falcone, Buscetta became the first major informant in mafia history. He broke Omeirada. He gave names. He gave maps. He gave the government a blueprint of the entire organization. His testimony opened a door that had remained sealed for nearly a century. In 1986, after years of preparation, Italy launched the Maxi Trial in Palermo, a judicial offensive of historic scale. 475 mafiosi were indicted. Hundreds of witnesses. A bulletproof courtroom built inside a prison. Proceedings that lasted nearly 6 years. Prosecutors Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino knew what they were up against. They moved like military tacticians. Every move was calculated. Every witness protected. They weren't just prosecuting crime. They were challenging a criminal system that had ruled Italy in silence for generations. The Maxi Trial concluded in 1992 with 338 convictions. Over 2,600 years of combined sentencing. For the first time, top-level bosses were legally acknowledged to be part of Cosa Nostra. It was a seismic moment in global organized crime. But Cosa Nostra doesn't forget. Just months later, Falcone and Borsellino were assassinated, killed by massive car bombs, planted by mafia operatives near Palermo. The message was brutal but clear. You may jail the men, but we control the fear. The Maxi Trial set a precedent for other countries fighting organized crime. The US used RICO laws, inspired by mafia structures, to bring down entire crime families. Latin American governments began mapping cartel hierarchies. Europol and Interpol adjusted frameworks for transnational mafias. It also reshaped how journalists, judges, and the public understood criminal enterprises. No longer just street-level thugs, these were strategic, systemic power structures that could infiltrate every level of society. You'd think the Maxi Trial would be the end of the story. Hundreds convicted. Leaders imprisoned. The state finally in control. But the truth is, Cosa Nostra didn't die. It evolved. Like a virus adapting to a vaccine, the mafia lowered its profile, tightened its ranks, and slipped back into the shadows. And what they left behind wasn't just history. They left a playbook. A template that shaped every major organized crime group that followed. Today's cartels in Mexico. The Russian Mafia. Triads in Hong Kong. Yakuza in Japan. Even digital crime rings operating in cyberspace. Almost all of them use the same structure pioneered by Cosa Nostra. Hierarchies with strict loyalty enforcement. Compartmentalization to protect leadership. Integration with legitimate businesses. Leveraging political connections to ensure protection. And cultural codes to maintain silence. The Sicilian Mafia didn't just commit crimes. It redefined how to organize crime. And that structure is still alive, across continents, currencies, and criminal models. Even today, Cosa Nostra is believed to be involved in real estate in major Italian cities, EU agricultural subsidies through fraudulent farm ownership, tourism-based laundering via restaurants and resorts, construction contracts with bribed officials, drug distribution networks connected to Colombian and Balkan suppliers. In fact, a 2022 Europol report suggested that organized crime makes up over 1% of the EU's GDP, and much of that still traces back to Italian syndicates, including Cosa Nostra. It's no longer about shootouts. It's about quiet control. One of the most dangerous legacies of Cosa Nostra is how they exposed weaknesses in democratic systems. They taught politicians that votes could be bought. They showed law enforcement that laws could be bent with enough money. They proved that fear didn't require weapons, it only needed silence. Even today, there are parts of southern Italy where the mafia remains stronger than the mayor's office. They don't run campaigns, they run neighborhoods. And globally, governments still struggle with the same challenge. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't wear a uniform, doesn't speak openly, and doesn't need headlines to win? Italy has made progress. Dozens of anti-mafia task forces exist today. Assets worth billions have been seized. Thousands of mafiosi have turned state's witness. But the fight isn't over. It never really is. Because crime doesn't vanish. It adapts. And Cosa Nostra's real legacy isn't just in the bodies it buried or the judges it bombed. It's in the methods. In how governments now watch for rackets in construction bids. How banks track shell companies. How journalists follow trails from rural farmlands to offshore accounts. All of that started with the mafia. So let's break it down clearly. The Sicilian mafia started as local protection thugs. It became a global institution of fear, wealth, and political manipulation. And even as its name fades, its blueprint survives, in the boardrooms of cartels, in the digital networks of cybercrime, and in the shadows of corrupt systems worldwide. Cosa Nostra didn't just shape organized crime. It shaped how the world thinks about power. When we talk about Cosa Nostra, we're not just talking about a gang of criminals. We're talking about a system that outlasted regimes, that infiltrated democracies, that built fortunes, influenced governments, and shaped global crime as we know it. And even now, in the boardrooms, on the streets, in the shadows of legitimate businesses, you can still feel the ripple of what started in the hills of Sicily. Because Cosa Nostra wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was the criminal enterprise, the model, the blueprint, the archetype. Governments learned to track criminal networks more intelligently. Law enforcement adopted organized crime units and racketeering statutes. And the world began to recognize that crime isn't just chaos. It can be calculated. It can be corporate. But despite decades of trials, arrests, and reforms, one fact remains. The methods survive. You'll find them in drug cartels using family loyalty and compartmentalized command. In cybercrime rings mimicking mafia structures through coded language and anonymity. And in state corruption scandals where bribery operates just like a protection racket. Different faces, different tools, same model. So what does this tell us? It tells us that true power often doesn't need a title, a podium, or a law. It just needs leverage, silence, loyalty, and fear. Cosa Nostra understood that. And they wielded it, not just in Sicily, not just in America, but across the world. And that's why this isn't just a story about crime. It's a story about control. So now we ask you, do you think Cosa Nostra is still active today, just more silent, more corporate? Has modern law enforcement truly caught up with the structure it created? And how many global crises, economic, political, even humanitarian, still have invisible fingerprints from criminal systems like this? Drop your answers in the comments. We want to hear your theories. Because history isn't just written by governments. Sometimes it's written in blood, and buried in silence. But some secrets don't stay buried forever. In our next Mafia Chronicle, we'll expose the men who tried to outlive the empire they helped build and the myths they left behind. The next story might just change what you thought you knew. And if you found this breakdown insightful, disturbing, or just eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe. We've got more stories just like this, peeling back the layers of power, crime, and the secrets that shape the world.